The crisp autumn air set the tone for the family gathering, where everyone had come together to celebrate Ethan and Lily Carter's 10th wedding anniversary. Ethan, a dependable man in his mid-30s, had always prided himself on his stable life, a loving wife, a modest but successful construction business, and a tight-knit family that included his younger brother, Ryan. Ryan, 4 years younger than Ethan, was the polar opposite of his brother. Where Ethan was responsible and methodical, Ryan was carefree and magnetic. His charm often left a trail of admirers, but he struggled to maintain the stability Ethan had achieved so effortlessly. Ethan often stepped into the role of protector, especially after their parents passed away. Despite their differences, they were brothers, bound by loyalty, or so Ethan believed. The party was held in the backyard of Ethan and Lily's home. Strings of lights hung from the trees, casting a warm glow on the mingling guests. Lily moved gracefully through the crowd, her laughter ringing out as she greeted friends and family. Her wavy brown hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her emerald green dress clung just enough to hint at the figure underneath. She had always been the center of attention, and tonight was no exception. Ethan watched her from across the yard, feeling a swell of pride. "She's amazing, isn't she?" Ryan's voice cut through Ethan's thoughts as he approached with a glass of whiskey in hand. "She is," Ethan replied with a smile. "We've come a long way together." Ryan smirked, raising his glass in a toast. "To 10 years and counting. You've got something special, bro." As the night wore on, Ethan noticed small moments that didn't sit right. He spotted Ryan standing a little too close to Lily by the buffet table, their conversation punctuated by bursts of laughter. Later, as the guests gathered for a toast, Ryan's hand lingered a second too long on Lily's lower back. Ethan dismissed the thoughts as paranoia, chalking them up to Ryan's naturally flirtatious nature. But the tension built as the evening progressed. Ethan's best friend, Marcus, approached him with a hesitant look. "You doing okay?" he asked, nodding toward Ryan and Lily, who were now chatting by the fire pit. Ethan forced a chuckle. "Why wouldn't I be?" Marcus hesitated, then shrugged. "Just keep an eye on things, man." The comment stuck with Ethan as the guests began to leave. Lily had disappeared inside to tidy up, and Ryan was helping carry chairs to the shed. Ethan decided to call it a night, and went into the house to find Lily. She was in the kitchen, stacking plates. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a faint flush to her cheeks. Ethan leaned against the doorway. "You look like you've had fun tonight." She smiled but didn't meet his eyes. "It was a great night. Everyone seemed to have a good time." Ethan stepped closer, placing a hand on her waist. "You're the reason for that." Her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she leaned into him. "I'm exhausted," she said softly. "I think I'll head to bed early." Ethan nodded, sensing her hesitation but choosing not to press. He kissed her forehead and watched her retreat upstairs. Later that night, Ethan lay in bed, unable to sleep. A nagging feeling gnawed at him, a sense that something wasn't right. Quietly, he got up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As he passed the living room, he froze. Through the sheer curtains, he saw Ryan sitting on the back patio with his phone in hand. He was texting someone, a faint smile playing on his lips. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Who could Ryan possibly be talking to at this hour? The first seeds of doubt had been planted, though Ethan didn't yet know how deeply they would take root, or how devastating the truth would be. Ethan couldn't shake the unease that had gripped him since the party. The way Ryan had lingered, the slight but telling tension in Lily's demeanor, and that late-night smile on Ryan's face as he texted someone, it all added up to a puzzle Ethan couldn't piece together. He tried to dismiss it, telling himself he was being paranoid, but the doubts wouldn't let go. The next morning, Ethan rose early, hoping a run would clear his head. The brisk morning air filled his lungs as he jogged through the quiet neighborhood, but his thoughts kept circling back to Lily and Ryan. By the time he returned home, sweat dripping down his face, he was no closer to shaking the feeling that something was off. Inside, the smell of coffee greeted him. Lily was at the kitchen counter, her back to him, flipping through a magazine. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, and she was wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her pajamas. She turned and smiled when she saw him. "Morning," she said, sliding a mug of coffee toward him. "Morning," Ethan replied, watching her closely as he took a sip. She seemed relaxed, but there was a subtle tightness in her smile, like she was holding something back. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, I was out like a light," she said quickly, too quickly. She returned her attention to the magazine, flipping the page without really looking at it. Ethan hesitated. "You seemed distracted last night." She looked up at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Distracted? How?" "Just..." Ethan paused, unsure how to phrase it without sounding accusatory. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" Lily sighed, setting the magazine down. "Ethan, everything's fine. I've just been tired with work and the party planning. Don't overthink it." Her response was reasonable, but it didn't soothe the nagging feeling in Ethan's chest. Before he could press further, Ryan appeared in the doorway, hair still damp from a shower. "Morning, lovebirds," he said, flashing his usual grin. He grabbed a slice of toast from the counter and leaned against the fridge. "Morning," Lily said, her tone brighter now, almost overly so. Ethan watched their interaction closely. Ryan was relaxed, as he always was, but Lily seemed more animated around him, her fatigue from moments ago disappearing like smoke. The day passed uneventfully, but Ethan's unease grew. He found himself replaying moments from the party, scrutinizing every detail. He told himself he was overreacting, that Ryan was family and Lily was his wife. They would never betray him. But that night, as Ethan lay in bed, something Lily said nagged at him. She had mentioned being tired from work, but she hadn't worked the day before the party. It was a small inconsistency, but it stood out in Ethan's mind. When he finally fell asleep, it was restless. He woke in the early hours to an empty bed. The dim glow of the bathroom light filtered through the cracked door, and he heard the faint sound of running water. He sat up, listening. After a moment, the water stopped, and Lily emerged, her face pale and her eyes glassy. "Hey," Ethan said, his voice thick with sleep. "You okay?" She jumped slightly, her hand clutching the doorframe. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said softly. "I wasn't feeling well. Just needed some water." Ethan frowned, watching as she climbed back into bed. Her movements were deliberate, almost cautious, as if she were afraid to disturb him further. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked again, his concern deepening. "Yes," she murmured, turning away from him. Ethan lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Something about her behavior didn't sit right. The way she avoided his eyes, the tension in her body, she was hiding something. The following morning, Ethan decided to take action. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being left in the dark, and he needed answers. After breakfast, when Lily left for her yoga class, Ethan waited until he heard her car pull out of the driveway. Then he went into the bedroom, searching for any clues that might explain her strange behavior. He rifled through her drawers, feeling a pang of guilt but unable to stop himself. In her nightstand, he found nothing out of the ordinary, some books, a few loose hair ties, and a notebook filled with grocery lists and to-do items. But in the back of the drawer, hidden beneath a stack of old receipts, was a small envelope. Ethan's heart raced as he pulled it out. It was unmarked, and inside was a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, he found a handwritten note. "Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again soon. R." The world seemed to tilt as Ethan stared at the words. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who was R? Ryan? It couldn't be. He was jumping to conclusions, wasn't he? But the note was damning, and the implications were clear. Ethan's chest tightened as anger and betrayal coursed through him. He set the note down, his hands trembling. From the driveway, he heard Lily's car pulling back in. Panic gripped him as he shoved the envelope back into the drawer and closed it. He sat on the edge of the bed, his heart pounding as footsteps approached the door. When Lily walked in, she smiled at him, oblivious to the storm brewing behind his calm facade. "How was yoga?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "It was good," she replied, setting her bag down. "What did you do this morning?" Ethan forced a smile. "Nothing much. Just thinking about how lucky I am." As Lily leaned down to kiss him, Ethan's mind churned. The note was proof of something, but what? And how far had it gone? He would find out. Ethan spent the rest of the day in a haze, his thoughts racing as he tried to make sense of the note he'd found. Was he imagining things, or had the cracks in his seemingly perfect life always been there? He needed answers but knew he couldn't confront Lily, or Ryan, without more proof. That evening, Ethan sat at the dinner table with Lily and Ryan. The conversation flowed easily between them, with Ryan recounting a story about his latest job interview. His charm and quick wit had always made him the life of any gathering, but now Ethan saw every laugh and every glance with suspicion. Lily, for her part, seemed at ease. She smiled and joked, her usual warmth on full display. Yet, Ethan couldn't shake the memory of the note, or the way she had avoided his gaze the night before. "You've been quiet, Ethan," Ryan said, breaking into his thoughts. "Everything okay?" Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind. Work's been stressful." Ryan nodded sympathetically, but there was something in his expression, something fleeting, that made Ethan's stomach tighten. Was it guilt? Or was he seeing what he wanted to see? After dinner, Ethan excused himself and went to the garage, pretending to work on an old woodworking project. In reality, he needed space to think. The note had opened a floodgate of doubts, and the more he thought about it, the more questions he had. Could Ryan and Lily really be involved? The idea was unthinkable, but the signs were there, the lingering touches, the private conversations, the way Lily seemed more animated around Ryan than around him. Ethan clenched his fists. If his suspicions were true, he needed to know how long it had been going on, and how far it had gone. The next day, Ethan took a drastic step. While Lily was at work and Ryan was out, he installed a small tracking app on Lily's phone. It wasn't something he ever thought he'd do, but he felt justified. If she was hiding something, he had to know. That evening, as Lily scrolled through her phone on the couch, Ethan's stomach churned. He watched her from the corner of his eye, wondering who she might be texting. Was it Ryan? Or was he letting his imagination run wild? When she got up to make tea, Ethan's phone buzzed with an alert. He quickly glanced at the screen and saw a message from Lily's phone. "Can we meet again? Same place?" His breath caught in his throat. The message had been sent to a contact named R. His heart pounded as he stared at the screen, barely able to process what he was seeing. Lily returned with 2 mugs of tea, setting one down in front of him. "You've been distracted lately," she said softly, sitting beside him. Ethan forced a smile. "Just work stuff. Nothing to worry about." She gave him a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "You always take on so much. You should let yourself relax." Her touch, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cruel reminder of his growing doubts. The next morning, Ethan's resolve hardened. He waited until Lily left for work and Ryan headed out for the day, then opened Lily's laptop. The tracking app allowed him to see recent activity, including messages and location data. What he found made his stomach drop. Lily had visited a hotel 2 towns over 3 times in the past month. Each visit coincided with a day she had claimed to be working late. Ethan leaned back in the chair, his hands trembling. The evidence was damning, but there was still one crucial piece missing, proof of who she had met. That evening, Ethan pretended everything was fine. He cooked dinner, made small talk with Lily and Ryan, and even laughed at Ryan's jokes. But inside, he was planning his next move. The following week, Ethan told Lily he had an overnight business trip. She seemed unfazed, kissing him goodbye as he packed a small bag. Instead of leaving town, Ethan parked his truck at a nearby diner and waited. He didn't have to wait long. Around 7 p.m., Lily's car pulled out of the driveway, heading in the direction of the hotel. Ethan followed at a safe distance, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. When she pulled into the hotel parking lot, Ethan parked a few spaces away and watched as she got out of the car. She was dressed casually, her hair tied back, but there was an air of anticipation about her as she walked toward the entrance. Ethan waited, his pulse racing. Minutes later, a motorcycle pulled into the lot. His heart nearly stopped when Ryan removed his helmet and walked inside. Ethan sat frozen, staring at the hotel entrance. His worst fears had been confirmed, but the reality was even worse than he had imagined. The betrayal wasn't just between him and Lily, it was a family betrayal, one that cut deeper than he ever thought possible. For now, he stayed in his truck, his mind racing with plans. Confrontation would come later. First, he needed to know everything. Ethan sat in his truck for what felt like an eternity, his thoughts an avalanche of anger, hurt, and disbelief. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The sight of Ryan casually walking into the hotel had burned itself into his mind. It wasn't just his wife who had betrayed him, it was his own brother. He considered storming into the hotel to confront them, but something stopped him. If he barged in now, raw with emotion, he'd lose the upper hand. He needed more than a hunch and circumstantial evidence. He needed undeniable proof. Ethan stayed in the parking lot, watching the hotel entrance. He noted the time, 7:12 p.m., and decided to wait. Each passing minute felt like an hour. When Lily and Ryan finally emerged, it was 9:24 p.m. They didn't come out together. Lily exited first, walking briskly to her car. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and she looked around nervously before getting in. Moments later, Ryan followed, strolling out as if he didn't have a care in the world. He climbed onto his motorcycle, revved the engine, and sped off. Ethan's chest tightened as he watched them leave. The betrayal was no longer just a suspicion. It was real. The next morning, Ethan awoke with a plan forming in his mind. He couldn't let his emotions control him. Revenge wasn't about anger, it was about precision. At breakfast, Ethan observed Lily and Ryan carefully. They acted as though nothing had happened. Lily hummed softly as she prepared coffee, while Ryan scrolled through his phone at the table. The ease with which they lied to his face was almost more painful than the betrayal itself. "You're up early," Ryan said, glancing at Ethan. "Couldn't sleep," Ethan replied. "Too much on my mind." Ryan chuckled. "You need to learn how to switch off, bro. Life's too short to stress." Ethan smiled tightly. "You're probably right." Lily placed a cup of coffee in front of Ethan and kissed him on the cheek. "You've been working so hard lately. Maybe we should plan a getaway soon, just the two of us," she suggested. Ethan forced himself to meet her gaze. "That sounds like a great idea." Inside, his stomach churned. How could she sit here and pretend everything was fine? Over the next few days, Ethan threw himself into gathering as much information as possible. He installed a hidden camera in the living room, knowing that Lily and Ryan often lingered there when he was out. He also monitored her phone activity through the app he'd installed, taking screenshots of her messages to R. Each message he uncovered felt like a knife to the heart. "Can't stop thinking about last night. I wish we had more time. He doesn't suspect anything, does he? You're the only one who really understands me." The messages painted a picture of a relationship that was more than a fling. It was emotional, intimate. It wasn't just his marriage that had been stolen, it was the bond between brothers. One evening, Ethan reviewed the footage from the hidden camera. The sight of Lily and Ryan sitting close together on the couch, their conversation punctuated by furtive glances and soft laughter, confirmed what he already knew. At one point, Ryan leaned in and whispered something that made Lily laugh, her cheeks flushing. Ethan clenched his jaw. He had seen enough. The next morning, Ethan acted as if everything was normal. He kissed Lily goodbye as she left for work, then called Ryan to meet him for lunch. At the diner, Ryan was his usual carefree self, joking and laughing as he devoured a plate of pancakes. Ethan played along, biding his time. "So," Ethan said casually, How's the job search going? Ryan shrugged. Slow. I've got a few leads, but nothing solid yet. You've always landed on your feet, Ethan said, forcing a smile. I'm sure something will come up. Ryan grinned. You know me, I always figure it out. Ethan studied his brother, searching for any sign of guilt. But Ryan's carefree demeanor never wavered. You ever think about settling down? Ethan asked suddenly. Ryan raised an eyebrow. What brought that up? Just wondering, Ethan said. You're great with people. I figured you'd have someone special by now. Ryan smirked. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. Ethan's chest tightened at the vague response, but he kept his composure. Well, if you ever need advice, you know where to find me. Ryan laughed. You're the expert, huh? 10 years with Lily and still going strong. I'll give you that. Ethan forced a chuckle, though the words stung. The irony was almost too much to bear. As they finished their meal, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his tone turning serious. You know, Ryan, I've been thinking about family a lot lately. About how important it is to stick together. Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. Yeah, man. Family's everything. Ethan smiled, though his jaw tightened. I'm glad you think so. As Ryan left the diner, Ethan sat alone, his mind racing. The time for subtlety was over. He had enough evidence, and it was time to turn the tables. The storm was coming, and Ethan would make sure neither Lily nor Ryan saw it coming. Ethan spent the following days carefully weaving the web that would expose the lies. He wasn't content to confront Lily and Ryan on impulse. He wanted the truth to come crashing down in a way they couldn't escape. Every move he made was calculated, every detail meticulously planned. One evening, Ethan sat in his office at home, poring over the evidence he'd gathered. The hidden camera footage, the messages, the hotel visits, it was all there. Each piece of evidence was like a weight pressing on his chest, but he forced himself to focus. On his desk sat a small black box, a voice recorder. It had been a last-minute purchase, but it would prove invaluable for what he had in mind. He pressed the record button and began speaking. My name is Ethan Carter. What I'm about to share is the truth of what's been happening in my life. This is for my own clarity, and maybe for whoever might need to know someday. His voice wavered, but he pushed through, recounting the events of the past few weeks. As he spoke, a strange calm settled over him. He had always been a man of reason, a man who solved problems instead of creating them. This was no different, except this time, the stakes were personal. 2 nights later, Ethan put his plan into action. He told Lily he had a business dinner in the city, and wouldn't be home until late. She seemed only mildly interested, her focus more on her phone than on him. Have fun, she said, barely glancing up. He left the house but didn't go far. Parking his truck at the edge of the neighborhood, he waited, his heart pounding. He had told Ryan earlier that day that he'd be out of town, ensuring that neither his wife nor his brother would suspect he was nearby. Just as he predicted, Ryan's car pulled into the driveway about an hour later. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he watched his brother stroll up to the front door and let himself in with a key. The sight was like a dagger to Ethan's chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Tonight wasn't about anger, it was about revelation. Using his phone, Ethan activated the hidden camera he had installed in the living room. The live feed showed Ryan and Lily sitting on the couch, their body language unmistakably close. They leaned in toward each other, their conversation muted but their intentions clear. Ethan hit the record button on his phone. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. Finally, Ryan moved closer to Lily, his hand brushing her arm. She didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled, a smile Ethan hadn't seen in years. That was it. Ethan had enough. Ethan drove back to the house, parking in the driveway. He grabbed the voice recorder and his phone, the evidence he'd gathered securely backed up in multiple locations. As he unlocked the front door, the sound of laughter greeted him. It was a sound that had once brought him joy, but now it felt like mockery. He stepped into the living room, and the laughter died instantly. Lily and Ryan froze, their expressions shifting from surprise to panic. Ethan, Lily stammered, standing abruptly. I thought you were at dinner. Ethan shut the door behind him, his movements slow and deliberate. Dinner ended early, he said, his voice calm but ice-cold. Looks like I came home just in time. Ryan stood, his hands raised defensively. Bro, it's not what it looks like. Ethan tilted his head, his lips curving into a bitter smile. Really? Because I've got about 3 weeks' worth of footage and messages that say otherwise. Lily's face turned pale. Ethan, let me explain. No, Ethan interrupted sharply, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. You've had plenty of time to explain. You just didn't think I'd ever find out. He pulled out his phone, opening the hidden camera footage. With a single tap, he played back the live recording of their cozy moment on the couch just minutes ago. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint echo of their voices on the recording. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Ethan, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Don't, Ethan snapped. Don't insult me with apologies. You made your choices. Ryan stepped forward, his face a mix of guilt and defiance. Look, I know this is bad, but... Ethan turned on him, his voice like thunder. Bad? You betrayed me. My wife, my brother, 2 people I trusted more than anyone. And for what? A cheap thrill? Ryan flinched but said nothing. Ethan turned his gaze back to Lily. How long? Lily hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. A few months. Ethan laughed bitterly. Months? Of course. And I'm guessing all those late nights at work were lies too? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for it to happen, Ethan. It just did. Ethan's voice hardened. You didn't mean for it to happen, or you didn't mean for me to find out? Lily broke into sobs, but Ethan felt no sympathy. His anger and pain were too raw. He turned to Ryan, his voice low but menacing. You're not my brother anymore. Get out of my house. Ryan hesitated, glancing at Lily as if seeking her support, but she didn't meet his eyes. No, Ethan barked, his tone brooking no argument. Ryan grabbed his jacket and left without another word, the sound of the door slamming behind him echoing through the tense silence. Ethan looked at Lily, who was trembling. As for you, he said coldly, we're done. I'll be in touch with a lawyer. Ethan, please, she begged. I made a mistake. Don't throw everything away. You already did, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Without another word, he turned and walked upstairs, leaving Lily alone in the wreckage of what she'd destroyed. The silence in the house was deafening. After Ethan's thunderous departure to the upstairs bedroom, Lily remained frozen in the living room, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a physical force. She stared blankly at the door, where Ryan had just fled, the reality of her actions crashing down around her. Upstairs, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. The adrenaline from the confrontation had begun to fade, leaving him with a deep, hollow ache. He replayed the scene in his mind, his brother's feeble attempts at justification, Lily's tearful apologies. It all felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's life fall apart. He glanced at the voice recorder on the nightstand, its small red light still blinking. It had captured everything, every desperate excuse, every bitter accusation. Proof, if he ever needed it, of the betrayal he had endured. But what now? Divorce was inevitable, but that felt like the easy part. The harder question was how to rebuild the shattered pieces of his life. The next morning, Ethan came downstairs to find Lily sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy. She had clearly spent the night crying, but Ethan felt no sympathy. Her pain couldn't compare to what he was feeling. We need to talk, she said softly, her voice trembling. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee, not bothering to acknowledge her. Ethan, she tried again, desperation creeping into her tone. Please. I know I've hurt you, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. He set his mug down with a thud, cutting her off. Counseling? You think sitting in a room with a therapist is going to erase what you did? You slept with my brother, Lily. My brother. Tears streamed down her face. I made a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. But it didn't mean anything, Ethan. I love you. I always have. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. Love? Is that what you call sneaking around behind my back for months? Meeting him at hotels? Lying to my face every single day? She flinched but didn't look away. I know you don't believe me, but I never stopped loving you. I don't even know how it started with Ryan, it just happened. I was lonely, and he was there, and… Lonely? Ethan interrupted, his voice rising. That's your excuse? I've been here every day, working to build a life for us, and you were lonely? So you turned to him? I'm not excusing it, she sobbed. I'm just trying to explain. I was wrong, Ethan. I know that. But I can't lose you. Please don't let this be the end of us. Ethan stared at her, his heart a battlefield of emotions. A part of him wanted to believe her, to cling to the life they had built together. But the betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw. I don't know who you are anymore, he said finally, his voice cold and detached. And I don't think I want to. He turned and walked away, leaving Lily sobbing at the kitchen table. Later that afternoon, Ethan was in the garage, pretending to work on his woodworking project, when he heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. He peeked out the window and saw Ryan stepping out of his car, his expression hesitant. Ethan clenched his fists. The last thing he wanted was another confrontation, but he wasn't about to let Ryan off the hook. He stepped outside, blocking Ryan's path to the front door. What are you doing here? Ethan demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I wanted to talk, Ryan said, holding up his hands defensively. I know I screwed up, Ethan. I'm not here to make excuses. I just want to make things right. Ethan laughed bitterly. Make things right? How exactly do you plan to do that? Undo the months you spent sleeping with my wife? Erase the betrayal? You can't fix this, Ryan. Ryan's shoulders sagged. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've ruined everything. But you're my brother, Ethan. I can't just walk away without trying to make amends. You stopped being my brother the moment you touched her. Ethan shot back. And you don't get to decide how this ends. You lost that right. Ryan hesitated, his eyes filled with regret. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'll stay away if that's what you want. But I hope, someday, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He watched as Ryan got back in his car and drove away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. That evening, Ethan sat alone in the living room, the voice recorder in his hand. He played back the confrontation, listening to every word, every tearful plea, every hollow excuse. A part of him wanted to destroy it all, the recordings, the footage, the messages. To erase the evidence, and try to rebuild his life without the weight of what had happened. But another part of him, the part that still burned with anger and betrayal, had a different idea. Ethan opened his laptop and began typing. He wasn't sure how far he was willing to go, but one thing was certain: he wouldn't let Lily and Ryan walk away from this unscathed. The storm was far from over. Ethan spent the next few days in a quiet but calculated frenzy. His plan was coming together, a mix of strategy and patience. He wasn't just going to confront Lily and Ryan with more anger, that wasn't enough. They had shattered his life, and he intended to show them exactly what that meant. Late one night, Ethan sat in his office, his laptop glowing in the darkness. He had crafted a digital package containing all the evidence he had gathered, the messages, the footage, the note he'd found in Lily's drawer. It was all neatly organized, a damning dossier that painted a clear picture of their betrayal. But the piece de resistance was a carefully written email. It wasn't addressed to Lily or Ryan. Instead, it was directed to the people who mattered most to them. For Lily, it was her closest friends and family, people who had admired her as the devoted wife and perfect partner. For Ryan, it was a select group of his social circle and professional contacts, including potential employers. Ethan hesitated, his finger hovering over the mouse. Part of him felt the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't just about exposing the truth, it was about leveling the playing field. They had stolen his trust, his peace of mind, and his future. Now, he would take something from them, their image, their comfort, their lies. He saved the draft but didn't send it, yet. Timing was everything. The next weekend, Ethan arranged a family gathering under the pretense of a casual dinner. He invited a few close relatives, including Ryan and Lily. His goal wasn't just to confront them but to ensure their betrayal would be exposed in the most public and impactful way. The evening began normally enough. The family gathered in the living room, exchanging stories and laughter. Ethan played the perfect host, keeping the atmosphere light while watching Ryan and Lily closely. They seemed on edge, exchanging nervous glances but saying nothing. After dinner, as everyone settled in with drinks, Ethan stood and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but firm. "There's something important I need to share with you tonight." The room fell silent, all eyes on him. Ethan turned to Lily, who was sitting on the couch, her face pale. "Lily, you've always been the love of my life. And Ryan." He paused, his voice hardening. "You've always been the brother I looked up to, even when you didn't deserve it." Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at Lily, who looked like she wanted to disappear. "But I've learned some things recently," Ethan continued, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Things that have changed how I see both of you." He tapped a button, and the hidden camera footage played on the large TV behind him. The grainy video showed Lily and Ryan on the couch, their body language unmistakable. Gasps filled the room as the footage continued, cutting to clips of the hotel parking lot and screenshots of their messages. Lily covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. Ryan stood abruptly, his face red with shame and anger. "What the hell, Ethan?" Ryan snapped. "This is private." "Private?" Ethan shot back, his voice rising. "You mean like my marriage? Like the trust you destroyed? Don't talk to me about privacy, Ryan. You lost that privilege the moment you stepped into my house and into my wife's bed." The room erupted into chaos. Family members shouted, their voices a mix of disbelief, anger, and hurt. Ethan stood silently, letting the storm rage around him. He had said his piece. Lily tried to approach him, her face streaked with tears. "Ethan, please, don't," he said coldly, stepping back. "There's nothing you can say that I want to hear." Ryan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Lily crumpled to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. Ethan walked out of the room without another word, leaving Lily to face the fallout of her actions. That night, Ethan sat in his office, staring at the draft emails on his screen. The family intervention had been cathartic, but it wasn't enough. Ryan and Lily had to face the consequences beyond the walls of his home. He made one final adjustment to the email, ensuring every word was precise, every piece of evidence damning. Then, without hesitation, he hit send. The emails went out in an instant, scattering like seeds in the wind. He imagined the ripple effects, friends whispering, coworkers questioning, reputations crumbling. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of control. The next day, Ethan was surprised when there was a knock at his door. Opening it, he found Lily standing there, her face pale and her eyes swollen. "Can we talk?" she asked hesitantly. Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "What could you possibly have to say?" "I know I can't undo what I've done," she said, her voice shaking. "But I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was lost, and I made the worst mistake of my life. But you were always the one I loved, Ethan." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "You didn't just hurt me, Lily. You destroyed everything we built. And you didn't do it alone. So don't stand here and tell me you loved me while you were sneaking around with my brother. She broke down, clutching the doorframe for support. I'll do anything to make it right. Please, Ethan. I don't want to lose you. You already have, he said quietly, before closing the door. As he walked away, he felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of relief. He was finally free. The days following Ethan's revelations were marked by chaos. The emails he sent rippled through Lily and Ryan's worlds like a stone dropped into a still pond, creating waves they couldn't escape. Lily lost more than her reputation. Friends she had thought loyal began to distance themselves, whispers following her wherever she went. Her carefully curated image of a perfect wife and loving partner was now irreparably tarnished. For Ryan, the fallout was equally brutal. A promising job offer was rescinded after the hiring manager, one of the email recipients, deemed him untrustworthy. Friends he'd counted on began to question his character, some outright cutting ties. Ryan had always been the charming rogue, but now he was seen as a betrayer, a man who couldn't be trusted even with his own family. Ethan, on the other hand, was met with a mix of sympathy and astonishment. Friends and family reached out to him, offering support and expressing their outrage on his behalf. But Ethan kept his circle small, focusing on those who truly mattered. Despite the satisfaction of seeing justice served, the weight of betrayal still pressed heavily on him. Every quiet moment was filled with the echoes of what he had lost. One evening, as Ethan sat alone in his living room, nursing a glass of bourbon, there was another knock at the door. His heart sank, expecting Lily again. But when he opened the door, it wasn't Lily or Ryan, it was Marcus, his best friend since childhood. Hey, Marcus said, holding up a 6-pack of beer. Figured you could use some company. Ethan stepped aside, letting him in. You figured right. They settled into the living room, the silence between them comfortable. Marcus cracked open a beer and handed it to Ethan. I heard about the emails, Marcus said after a while. Ethan nodded, taking a sip. Word travels fast, huh? Fast enough, Marcus said. Look, I'm not here to lecture you or anything. What they did was unforgivable. But I've known you long enough to know that revenge isn't your style. So, how are you holding up? Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Honestly? I don't know. Some days, I feel like I'm finally moving forward. Other days, it's like I'm stuck in this loop, replaying everything over and over. Marcus nodded. That's normal. You were blindsided, man. It's going to take time. Ethan looked at his friend, appreciating his honesty. I thought I knew them, you know? Lily and Ryan, they were the two people I trusted most in the world. And they let you down, Marcus said. But that says more about them than it does about you. They sat in silence for a moment before Marcus spoke again. So, what's next? Ethan sighed. I don't know. The house feels empty. I can't stay here forever, but I don't know where to go. Then maybe it's time to figure that out, Marcus said. Start fresh. Build something new. You're stronger than you think, Ethan. Ethan nodded, the first flicker of hope sparking in his chest. A week later, Ethan received an envelope in the mail. It was from Lily. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he wanted to read whatever she had to say. Inside was a handwritten letter, the words shaky and full of desperation. Ethan, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to try one last time to make things right. I know I hurt you more deeply than I can ever put into words. If I could go back and undo it all, I would. But I can't, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. I've been talking to a therapist, trying to understand why I did what I did. It doesn't excuse my actions, but I've realized how much I took you for granted. You were everything to me, Ethan. You still are. Please, if there's even a sliver of a chance, let's try to rebuild. I'll do whatever it takes. You don't have to forgive me right away, or ever, but I can't accept that this is how our story ends. I love you. Lily. Ethan set the letter down, his emotions a tangled mess. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to cut her out of his life completely. But another part of him, the part that had once loved her with every fiber of his being, hesitated. He tucked the letter into a drawer, deciding he didn't have to make a decision right away. One afternoon, Ethan drove to a nearby lake where he and Ryan had spent countless summers as kids. The place was quiet, the water shimmering under the afternoon sun. He stood on the shore, memories flooding back. They had been inseparable once, partners in every adventure. How had it come to this? Ethan clenched his fists, anger bubbling to the surface. He picked up a stone and hurled it into the water, watching it sink without a trace. Good riddance, he muttered, as if the stone carried the weight of his betrayal. But as the ripples faded, so did his anger. All that was left was a hollow sadness. Ethan realized he wasn't just grieving his marriage, he was grieving the loss of his brother, the bond they had shared. And while he couldn't forgive Ryan, he couldn't carry the weight of his anger forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan made a decision. He would move forward, not for Lily, not for Ryan, but for himself. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was his to walk. Ethan took his first steps toward rebuilding his life with cautious optimism. The decision to move forward, however difficult, gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in weeks. He started small, focusing on the things he could control, selling the house, re-establishing his business focus, and reconnecting with himself. The house, once a symbol of love and stability, now felt like a monument to lies and betrayal. Ethan listed it on the market and began the process of packing up his belongings. Each box he filled felt like shedding a layer of the past. Among the things he packed were photo albums and keepsakes, reminders of a happier time. As he flipped through the pages of an old album, he came across a picture of him and Ryan as kids, standing by the lake with wide grins and muddy shoes. He closed the album, his chest tight with conflicting emotions. Ethan wasn't ready to forgive Ryan or Lily, but he was ready to let go of the anger that had consumed him. It wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to move forward. One evening, as Ethan was sorting through his belongings, his phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "You need a break. Meet me at the pub at 8. Ethan hesitated, then typed back a simple, "Sure." The pub was lively but not overcrowded, a mix of locals enjoying drinks and laughter. Marcus was waiting at a booth, 2 beers already on the table. "Thought you could use a night out," Marcus said as Ethan slid into the seat. "Thanks," Ethan said, taking a sip. "I think I needed this more than I realized." As they talked, Ethan found himself genuinely laughing for the first time in weeks. The weight on his shoulders felt lighter, if only for a little while. Toward the end of the night, Marcus glanced at him thoughtfully. "You know, I've been thinking. You're not the kind of guy who lets life knock him down for long. Have you thought about what's next?" Ethan shrugged. "Selling the house, focusing on work. That's about as far as I've gotten." Marcus leaned forward. "You should take some time for yourself. Travel, try new things. You've spent so much of your life taking care of everyone else. It's time to take care of you." Ethan nodded slowly. The idea of leaving town, even for a short time, was appealing. "Maybe I will," he said, the spark of possibility igniting in his mind. The house sold faster than Ethan expected. The day of the closing, he walked through the empty rooms one last time. Each room held memories, some joyful, others now tainted. He stopped in the bedroom, where Lily's note still sat in the drawer. He took it out, reading it one final time before folding it neatly and placing it in a box with other things he wasn't ready to throw away. He didn't keep it as a memento of Lily or the betrayal, but as a reminder of how far he had come, and how much farther he intended to go. As he locked the door for the last time, he felt a strange sense of relief. The chapter was closing, and a new one was beginning. A few days after moving into a smaller apartment, Ethan received an unexpected visitor, Ryan. He opened the door to find his brother standing there, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Ethan," Ryan began, his voice hesitant. "I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I needed to say this in person." Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You've got 5 minutes. Ryan nodded, taking a deep breath. I messed up. I know that. I hurt you in a way that I can never take back, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I was selfish, reckless, and stupid. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you how sorry I am. Ethan studied his brother, searching for sincerity in his words. Ryan looked more vulnerable than Ethan had ever seen him, but that didn't erase the betrayal. You're right, Ethan said finally. I don't forgive you. And I don't think I ever will. But I can't keep holding on to this anger either. So this is the last time we're going to talk about it. After this, we're done. Ryan nodded, his eyes downcast. I understand. And I'm sorry, Ethan. For everything. Ethan closed the door, feeling a strange mix of closure and sadness. The following week, Ethan booked a trip to a coastal town he had always wanted to visit. It wasn't a grand gesture or an escape, just a chance to clear his head and start fresh. As he stood on the beach, the waves crashing against the shore, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, he felt ready to face it. Ethan's trip to the coastal town began as a quiet retreat, a chance to find solace away from the reminders of betrayal. He spent his days exploring the sandy beaches, wandering through quaint shops, and rediscovering the simple joys of solitude. Each day, the weight on his chest lifted a little more. On his third day, Ethan found himself at a small cafe overlooking the ocean. The air was salty, and the sun warmed his face as he sipped a cup of coffee. He hadn't thought about Lily or Ryan in hours, a small victory he savored. A woman approached his table, her smile kind but hesitant. She looked to be in her late 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Mind if I sit here? She asked, gesturing to the empty chair. Ethan glanced around. The cafe was nearly full, and hers was the only request that didn't feel intrusive. Go ahead. Thanks, she said, setting her cup down. It's always packed here. Best coffee in town, though. They exchanged pleasantries, and Ethan learned her name was Amanda. She was a local, recently divorced, and like him, trying to rebuild her life. Their conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt a spark of connection. Over the next few days, Ethan and Amanda continued to cross paths, sharing meals and stories. There was something about her honesty and humor that drew him in, though he wasn't ready to admit it yet. One evening, as they walked along the beach, Amanda asked, "So, what brings you here? You don't strike me as the typical tourist." Ethan hesitated, unsure how much to share. But something about Amanda's presence made him feel safe. "I needed to get away," he admitted. "My wife, well, ex-wife now, cheated on me. With my brother." Amanda stopped in her tracks, her expression unreadable. "Your brother?" "Yeah," Ethan said, bitterness creeping into his voice. "They hid it for months. I found out, confronted them, and let the chips fall where they may." Amanda was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Finally she said, "That's complicated." Ethan frowned, sensing something in her tone. "You've got a story, don't you?" Amanda exhaled deeply. "I didn't want to say anything because I wasn't sure if it mattered, but I think I know who you're talking about. Your brother, Ryan Carter, right?" Ethan's heart stopped. "How do you know that name?" Amanda looked at him, her expression pained. "He was part of the reason my marriage ended. My husband worked with him for a while. Ryan had an affair with my best friend, and it destroyed us." Ethan stared at her, the coincidence too staggering to process. "You're kidding." "I wish I were," Amanda said. "When you mentioned the betrayal, I didn't put it together at first. But the more you talked about your brother, the more it clicked. I've met him before. And trust me, you're not the first person he's hurt." Ethan felt a rush of anger, not at Amanda but at Ryan. How many lives had his brother ruined? How many families had he left in tatters? "I thought I'd seen the worst of him," Ethan said, his voice tight. "But it sounds like there's more I didn't know." Amanda nodded, her hand brushing against his arm. I'm sorry, Ethan. Truly. But maybe knowing this helps in some way. You're not alone in what you've been through. The next morning, Ethan woke to a knock on his hotel door. Frowning, he opened it to find Ryan standing there, looking disheveled and desperate. What the hell are you doing here? Ethan demanded. I need to talk to you, Ryan said, his voice pleading. Please, just hear me out. Ethan stepped back, his anger simmering. You've got 5 minutes. Ryan entered, his eyes darting around the room. Look, I know I've screwed up, again and again. I've hurt you, I've hurt other people. But I'm trying to change, Ethan. I'm in therapy now, and I'm trying to understand why I do the things I do. Ethan crossed his arms. And you think showing up here is part of that process? Why are you really here, Ryan? Ryan hesitated, then blurted out. Because I'm losing everything. I've hit rock bottom. I lost my job, my friends, and now I've got nothing. I came here to ask for your forgiveness, Ethan. I can't move forward without it. Ethan stared at him, the words swirling in his mind. Forgiveness? After everything? Before Ethan could respond, there was another knock at the door. Confused, he opened it to find Amanda standing there, her expression a mix of shock and anger. Ryan? She said, her voice sharp. Ryan turned, his face paling. Amanda? You know each other? Ethan asked, his voice rising. Amanda's jaw tightened. Oh, we know each other, all right. This is the guy who wrecked my marriage. Ethan's blood ran cold as the pieces fell into place. Amanda hadn't just known Ryan, she had been another victim of his deceit, his recklessness. You've got to be kidding me. Ethan muttered, stepping away from both of them. Ethan, I didn't know you knew her, Ryan said quickly. I swear. Save it. Ethan snapped, his voice shaking with fury. I've had enough of your lies, Ryan. Get out. Now. Ryan looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. He left without another word, leaving Ethan and Amanda alone in the room. After a long silence, Amanda spoke. I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't mean for this to happen. It's not your fault. Ethan said, his voice heavy. Ryan has a way of poisoning everything he touches. Amanda hesitated, then stepped closer. Maybe we can't change the past, but we can decide what to do next. And I'd like to figure that out with you, if you're willing. Ethan met her gaze, seeing honesty and understanding in her eyes. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope, not just for himself, but for what might come next. Yeah, he said finally. I think I'd like that too. As they stood together, the ocean waves crashing in the distance, Ethan realized that while his story had taken an unexpected turn, it wasn't over. A new chapter was beginning, and this time, he would write it on his own terms.